I'd like to just ask William to go through some of his life eras, starting when he finished high school, and he will share that with us to give you some basis for which you can then ask some specific questions. And really, I'd like to start off. The first question to you, William, is when you finished high school in Budapest, the time was June 1939.
Correct.
And obviously you didn't know what was in store for Hungary, for you. What happened to you that summer when you finished high school?
Right. I was going to go to Scotland to play golf in August, July, August. And I come to that. My father was up at Cambridge. He was a very charming German gentleman who had a big nursery, trees and flowers, and a beautiful park he lived in. And the idea was that this German person had a daughter, and the idea was that I would be invited for the daughter to have company for 2 weeks, 3 weeks in their lovely house. But then the daughter disappeared with her mother, because the mother was a Jewess, and he very wisely thought that they better get out, and they went to Switzerland. So there I was with my host, who was had a golden Nazi party, but his heart was not in the Nazi area. In fact, he was murdered by the Nazis just after in 1941 or 42. And I had some interesting experiences. The first interesting experience was that I had a call from the Hungarian embassy that the ambassador, who then was, that I forgot the name, he was a soldier, and he was executed after the war. He was a very bad Nazi. And he asked, the embassy asked me that he would like to see me, and I thought this was a social visit. Not at all. He was very angry. He said, "Sit down, I have to talk to you. You insulted the Führer." I said, "I insulted the Führer? What do you mean?" It was reported to me by the German authorities that you had said in company that you thought that the Hitlerjugend, that you criticized that instead of going to church on Sunday, they went on excursions. And you therefore insulted the Führer. And if you do that once more, then I let the German government do what they like. So after that I kept my mouth shut. So on one occasion, he said, we're going to the theater, and but you are not allowed to ask any questions. You can ask all the questions when we go out and have dinner after the theater. So the big Daimler was pulled out, and we went to the theater. We had our seats in the fourth row on the corner of the gangway, at the end of the gangway. And after about 10 minutes, he said, come on, we're leaving. So we got out, and he said, now we're going to walk 10 minutes. Then he hailed a taxi from the street. The taxi then took us a little bit outside Berlin, where there were little houses, single houses. But he didn't drive to the houses again in an open street, and then we walked about 5 minutes till we arrived. There was a gentleman, an oldish gentleman. He looked to me, but he was definitely about half my age now. And they embraced each other. They all went in, and they talked and talked and talked. After half an hour, he said, it's now time for us to leave. So we did the same thing backwards, meaning that we walked, and then we went back to the theater and sat down in our seats. And then later on, the car came and picked us up, and we went to have dinner at the Garden. After dinner, we went back to his home, and then he said, now we're going to walk in the park. And he said, this I do once a month, and this is what keeps my Jewish lawyer alive. And he said that I do that because the fact that I still keep up with him is something which is very important for him. When the Germans attacked Poland in 1939 September, he wrote to Hitler, and he said that he thinks it's a mistake because the Americans and the British will enter the war. He got back a very terse letter that the Führer knows what he's doing, keep to your own business. And then the Germans went for Belgium, and they again wrote to Hitler. On this occasion, they arrested him. They put him into a concentration camp, which it was in Germany. I forgot the name of it. And then eventually they killed him. And he was a member of the party. So this was the background for me to leave Berlin and come to Great Britain. And when I arrived in Dover, the immigration officer asked me a number of questions. They said, how much money have you got with you? Have you got money in England? I said, no, we have no money in England, but I got traveler's checks. Like, what are you doing in England? Why did you come to England? I said, to play golf.
That was the advice that you got from your father, right? Was it to
Yes.
talk about sports?
Exactly, that's quite right. And so I said to play golf. He said, why would you want to come and play golf in England? I said, first of all, the golf course in Hungary, we only have one, is not very good. Secondly, I'm not playing golf in England, I'm playing golf in Scotland. So he said, in Scotland? Where in Scotland? I said, Carnoustie. He said, that's a very difficult course. I said, I know it's very difficult because I'm the Hungarian golf boys had to be below 18, boys champion. Now, just as a secret, I was the only boy who played golf. And so therefore, nominated myself for that position. And then the chap said to me, now you have to be careful because Tom is very good. That was the name of the person, young boy. And in fact he won. And I got boom, and in I was. And I didn't know until about a year and a half later that he landed me unconditionally, which meant that I could stay as long as I wanted. I could take a job. I was actually in the same position as any English or Scots were, but I didn't know about this. And it came to light when one day I was called in by the Ministry of Labour and National Service. I was already working for ICI, which was a very large chemical company in Great Britain. And the person who called me in said, you have committed a major problem because you didn't report to us before you went to ICI. I said, I beg your pardon, the aliens police, which we had to report to, we got a little grey book with it. It said what our condition is. And the police said it's not necessary for me to report to you. To which the man said, you're lying. I said, I beg your pardon, I'm not lying. Tired of me and said, all right, go, go, go. So I went back to the police and they said, what was this all about? And then they explained to me that I was landed unconditionally. So I was very proud of that. And in 1942, we were getting a little bit hungry because the rations then...
William, can I interrupt you for a second? One of the before we get to 1942, one of the determinant factors in anybody's career is which university, which college they go to. Now you went to Trinity College,
yes,
Cambridge.
Yes.
Can you tell us how you got there and how that determined your future career?
I got there. I didn't have to take an entry exam because my father in 1908 was at Trinity College as the only Hungarian then. He was there only for 2 years because his father called him back for the third year because he didn't work at all. He hunted. He was a half blue in fencing, which put him in a rather important position at Cambridge. And he played polo. So he was a very serious person, obviously.
Because he played polo.
Yes. And so then when I arrived in November 1939, I didn't have to take an exam. I just went in because my father was there before. And that's why I was accepted by the English boys, and I was then made secretary of the most important social club, the university, the Trinity College and the university had. So it was a very interesting time, and I could talk a lot about. As you probably don't know, but there were 3 people who were at Cambridge who turned out to be spies, and they were spying for the other side, obviously, and that wasn't the Germans, that was the Russians, the Soviet. Now I took my degree in natural sciences, and I then...
Why did you choose natural sciences?
I thought that the diplomatic life for me was not really very... The war was on. I I had to find a job which was going to keep me alive. And I thought that chemical engineering sounded very sexy. When I arrived at Trinity, my tutor, the Reverend Burnaby, who was also in charge of the chapel, he said, what would you like to read? I said, chemical engineering. He said, no, chemical engineering is Tripos Part 2. You have to get Tripos Part 1, and for chemical engineering, it has to be natural sciences. So, at school, I did not very much natural sciences at Kirkot. And so I was a little bit nervous when I went into my interview. So he rang up somebody called Fred Mann, and he was a professor, a member of the Royal Society, so he was no pygmy. And he asked me, you come middle of the term, most of your colleagues will have either stipendiums or they have scholarships. So I would just like to know a little bit of what you know. I said, I know that H2O is water. But don't ask me why. At which he lifted the receiver and yelled to Burnaby, take away this man, I can't deal with him. Good morning. So I went back to, and Burnaby said to him, which he then afterwards told me, he said, no, I can't send him back to Hungary, there's a war on. So I got a crammer. A crammer is a person who pushes the science into you, and in the end I got a degree. It was an ordinary degree, but if you eat 2 dinners at Trinity afterwards, you get the MA. So I'm an MA, of course. Now, how did I get into ICI? At the same time as I was coming to Trinity, very soon afterwards, King Peter of Yugoslavia turned up because the Germans chucked him out of Yugoslavia, he was a Serb naturally, and he was at Clare College. And because our estates were in that part of Hungary, which became Croatia, I was very anxious to meet him. Eventually we met him, and I invited him to dinner in the rooms of Trinity College. Because Trinity College is the college at Cambridge, I felt Clare College I'm doing him justice by inviting him to Trinity, although he was a Serb. So we had a very nice dinner, and on the wall was a map, Nam Shor.
No, never.
Never. And he was with the back to that. And we started talking what should happen after the war. And I said, I think you people have taken too much of Hungary. We need to compromise. He said, what is your suggestion? I said, my suggestion is to have it along the Franz Joseph Canal. He said, Franz Joseph Canal, I never heard of it. I said, Peter. Then I took him by the arm and took him to the map. The big canal combining the Danube with the Theiss rivers. That, he said, that isn't called Franz Joseph Canal, that's called King Peter II Canal. And that gave our friendship, to the extent that when he died in not very nice circumstances in the States, and when his remains were brought back to Serbia about 3 years or 4 years ago. I was invited to that occasion. And I think I was the only person then alive who knew Peter when he was a young man. So that to me was a very interesting episode.
And how did you then get to ICI? That was really your first job, wasn't it?
Yes.
At Trinity College.
I mean, here again, Peter comes into the picture because his fiancée was Princess Alexandra of Greece. And she and her mother, Princess Safar, were billeted with Lord Melchett. Lord Melchett was the deputy chairman of ICI. And so Peter asked me once, what you're going to do? I'm going to try and get a job in the chemical industry, and ICI would be my favorite. I said, ICI, yes, and Lord Melchett, you're staying with Lord Melchett, I will mention it to him. I said, that'd be very kind. So he then apparently mentioned it, because the next thing is I got a letter from Lord Melchett saying, my dear Baron, I understand that you're interested in joining ICI. Please go up to Manchester, where we have the headquarters of our organic chemical industry, because we are going to build up Central Europe after the war, because the IG Farben will not be any longer IG Farben, which in fact would happen, and you'll be the right person. So I was very happy. My interview went beautifully, and they said, we're going to write to you. 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks passed by, no letter. And the 5th week, I got a letter to say, we are very sorry, we can, after all, cannot offer you the job, because we undertook that anybody who is not an ally, we cannot, thank you, we cannot offer jobs. Hungarians, Romanians, Bulgarians, all these nice people. And so that upset me terribly. I went, this was on a Saturday, and I took the letter in from the Porter's Lodge, where all the mail was being collected, and went to Hall for breakfast. And there was an empty space near a guy I knew called Max Wozner. And I said, damn it! He said, William, I got such a hangover, will you kindly be more considerate? To which I then said, I apologize, I will be more considerate, but I was very upset. He said, why were you upset? I said, because I was hoping to join ICI, and now they tell me they can't take me. He said, ICI? I said, yes. Why? So my father is head of personnel. I fixed it. So he then obviously talked to his father, whose name was also Max Wozner, and he was a very famous sportsman. He was a tennis and other sports, and the son was a little bit lazier than his father. Anyway, in the end, he comes back and says, look, we are very sorry. We made this undertaking that we're not taking anybody unless they're allies with governments, but I'm going to think about it. And then he came back and said, I tell you what we're doing. When our interview took place with you, that was before we had this move from the government. And I consider a handshake is the agreement. And that's how I got into Trinity. Only place in the world where this could happen is Great Britain.
Yes. And William, you then had a very concrete idea about, or a concrete goal about your salary, didn't you?
Yes.
Could you share that with us?
Yeah. I was taken in at ICA at the beginning at £360 a year, which was a big salary. Compared with my digs, which represent in Manchester, I had a bedroom, a sitting room, a bathroom, full board, meaning dinners every night, and Saturday, Sunday lunch too. I paid £2.10 a week. £2.10 is about, I mean, 50, today's money about between 25 and 50p. And so my aim was to earn £1,000 by the age of 30. I made it when I was 29. So I was very proud of this. And I said, now I have to go and see my director to try and ask him whether I could go further up in the scale. So I went to see him, and he was a very charming person. He gave me lunch at the RAC, which is a club, as you know. And he then said, now what do you want to talk about? I said, I would really like to know what chances I have to become the overseas director. It wasn't called international, overseas director of ICI. Overseas director, he used ICI. He said, what's the name of our company? I said, Imperial Chemical Industries. He said, right. Do you think that a Australian, a New Zealander, a South African, a Canadian, a Indian, and quite frankly, I could go on a bit longer, would want to see a Hungarian in charge of the overseas department? Never. So obviously this was a huge disappointment. And by chance I met Lord Melchett's son at some party, and I told him the story. And I said, he said, don't worry, that is unimportant. You come and join the bank. I said, what bank? The bank of which I am a partner, called M. Samuel. And M. Samuel is the bank that had started the Shell oil trading company. The family's name was Samuel, and Lord Bearsted, and I can come to later on to this name again, Lord Bearsted was the chairman. And so I joined M. Samuel, and then we had a development department, and this development department, I started working in it, and I headed it, and we started the first merchant bank in Jersey. And that is now one of the biggest banks on the island. But coming back to the, sorry, would you?
Yes, so it was a big transition then from chemical engineering to banking.
Yeah.
At first, was there a link between the two? Were you helping lending to this sort of industry, or how did you make that transition?
The transition came that I had industrial experience, and in the bank there was a, sorry.
Use the microphone, please. Yes, thank you.
Bit,
Closer, yes, thank you.
Yes. In the bank there was a development department, and I got involved there. And so I was able to use some of my experience in the industry. then Citibank decided to go into merchant banking. And they selected M. Samuel, and they bought 14%. So this was great excitement in the city because Citibank hadn't done that before. And I had a very interesting career from then onwards, and eventually I moved on and joined, became Hill Samuel, Philip Hill Higginson, we merged, and then from there on I went on to other things in banking.
Now, I think what would be interesting is if you could tell us your most memorable, perhaps your most memorable trip as a banker to Hungary.
Oh, yes. Lord Beerstead calls me in and says, William, I have just received an invitation from the president of the Hungarian National Bank. And I told the president that I couldn't go because I have other things to do, and asked whether a colleague of mine could go. And he said yes. To which he then said, and I would like you to go. Then I said to him, Dick, are you not satisfied with what I do? He said, what an extraordinary question. You realize that I shall never come back again. He said, why?
From Hungary.
From Hungary, sorry.
The year 1974.
Yes.
1974.
This is 1974.
Sorry. The invitation was for the 50th anniversary of the Hungarian National Bank. That was 1974. And so I said, you know, my father left unofficially with my mother, and my brother had a very exciting escape. So I said, all right, wait a second. He gets his secretary back and said, get me Mr. Timan on the telephone. Took on the telephone. He said, there seems to be a technical difficulty. I can't send the colleague I meant to send because he says, he told me that you would arrest him. I actually haven't heard on the other side, but what he must have said, why should we arrest him? And then Beerstead said, because his political views don't coincide with yours. So he then said, which he repeated, I give my word of honor that nothing will happen to me. So then he looked at me and said, will you not do it? I said, naturally. I was very cavalier in this because afterwards I thought perhaps it was a stupid thing to do, but I did it. So they got into the airplane, and there were lots of other people obviously going to this celebration. And at Ferryhead, we got out, and then I was getting really quite nervous. And I was just handing him my passport. You see, in communist days, you had mirrors in the back and mirrors in the front. So the guy sitting with the passport could see the whole body, so to say. And as I handed him my passport, I heard on the megaphone, Gershely Bárot keresünk.
We're looking for Baron Gershely.
Now that really is, what do I do now? Do I turn around and run back to the plane? But I was being pushed from behind. So I said, okay, the Holy Spirit perhaps look after me. So I went out with my passport, got my case, and went out of custom. There was a little man there clicked his heels. He said, Baruch, Mr. Baron, I'm here at the request of the president. He didn't say Tovarish, what's that in Hungarian?
Comrade.
Comrade. He said, simply the president wants to put a car at your disposal and use it to go wherever you like to go. So, and the little man said to me, it's very early yet for us to go and have lunch. So, would you like to see something? Yes, I said, I'd like to go to the golf course. He said, golf course? Where? I said, the Schwab hedge. The hedge means a mountain outside Budapest. He said, really? I said, yes, there is a funicular, and the funicular finishes up at a hotel called Golf Hotel. By this time it was rechristened to Red Star. And I said, from there it's only about 500 yards to the golf course. He said, okay, let's go and see. So we got to the hotel and turned left, and I said, now go straight on. And then you have to go right, and there is the golf club. You see the golf club. We were stopped because it was the major headquarters. You see, I can't speak any language now. So, was the headquarters of the Soviet army, who looked after people in Budapest, because all the golf club spaces were taken. I never went there, and I haven't been there since. So, and then it was very interesting because there was a chap called Fekete János, was his name, who was a good communist, but he knew that the other side may have a better chance in the future. So he was quite happy to have me. And so we then started doing business with the National Bank.
And William, so what you then moved to Vienna as a banker? And that was in the late 1980s, wasn't it? What made you move to Vienna?
Well, what happened was that after Hill Samuel, I wasn't very pleased with the management, and I had an offer from a new bank called Orion. It was an investment bank which had as its shareholders 6 important commercial banks. In England, it was the National Westminster Bank. In America, it was Chase Manhattan Bank. In Canada, it was Royal Bank of Canada. In Germany, it was Westdeutscher Landesbank. In Italy, it was Credito Italiano. And the 6th partner was Mitsubishi Bank in Japan. And that's with whom I started, and that was then, for quite some time, a very interesting possibility, because we traveled all over the world and we did quite a bit of business.
And when did you then travel or move to Budapest? Was it always from Vienna? So Vienna was your headquarters?
Vienna was my headquarters, and I really got active after the communist regime in 1989, and I was then working already for Kreditanstalt, which is an Austrian bank, and we did bond issues in the international market. And Hungary had a very famous company called
You think of Richter?
yes, thank you. Called Gedeon Richter, which was nationalized by the communists, but it retained very much a good relationship with the Soviet area because we manufactured pharmaceuticals, medicals, and under the Comecon, Hungary was allowed to continue manufacturing these for export to the Comecon area. And so we had a fairly good position in Soviet Russia. So when the change in politics came, it was decided to try and put onto the market 25% of this company, which was originally nationalized, and the other 75% would be in government hands. And then we did an issue together with Schröder's, who also were active in Hungary, and that was in
94.
1994.
1994.
And because I was a banker in England, and because our clients were mainly international, they invited me to go and join the board. And then about 98,
99.
99, when the former chairman died, and then I was made chairman. But I tell you something funny about being chairman. A guy goes into a parrot shop because he wants to buy a parrot. And he asked the chap, how much is that parrot? And he said, $500. Very nice parrot. Yes, he's very good. He understands English and speaks English. Then he said, but what about that parrot? Oh, that's more expensive because he also speaks German and English and understands German. And that would cost you about $7,000. But look at that parrot, he said. It's a really nice big parrot. Oh, that's $10,000. Why? The others call him the chairman.